The stars above the outer rim colony of Keller had always been quiet. Too quiet, some said. A forgotten system on the edge of mapped space, where trade routes barely brushed past and the Galactic Empire's influence felt distant, like a storm that hadn't arrived yet. People here lived simple lives. Miners, farmers, families who had traded safety for freedom. They knew the risks. They just never thought the Empire would bother with them. They were wrong. It began without warning. No early detection, no incoming signatures, no diplomatic channel, just a sudden distortion in space itself, as if reality had been torn open by invisible claws. Then they appeared. Massive Imperial warships spilled out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Black, angular, and suffocatingly vast, they blocked out entire constellations as they advanced. Their hulls reflected no light. Their presence swallowed it. Within seconds, every screen across Keller lit up in crimson. Incoming fleet, unknown hostility, seek immediate shelter. Governor Realm stood in the central command tower, staring upward through reinforced glass as shadows consumed the sky. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Open a channel." "No response, sir," an officer replied, pale. "They're not transmitting anything." "Then send one." "We are." Silence stretched. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing came back. Realm swallowed. "They're not even pretending." He had read the reports. Entire civilizations erased in hours, not conquered, erased. The Empire didn't negotiate with worlds it deemed insignificant. And Keller was insignificant. "Orbital defenses?" he asked. "Charging, sir, but against a fleet that size." They both knew how that sentence ended. Still the guns fired. Bright streaks of energy surged upward from the planet's surface, defiant, desperate. For a moment it almost looked like hope. Then the Empire responded. A single coordinated volley. Clean, precise, brutal. Keller's orbital defense grid vanished in an instant, reduced to expanding clouds of molten debris. The sky flickered as the last fragments burned out. No second chance. No resistance. Just silence again. Far below the surface, buried beneath layers of outdated infrastructure and abandoned tunnels, a lone facility flickered to life. Dust shook loose from the ceiling as ancient systems groaned awake. Inside, a woman hunched over a cracked console, fingers flying across keys that hadn't been touched in years. "Come on, don't do this now," she muttered under her breath. Her name was Lyra Venn, communications technician, though lately that title meant little. The station had been decommissioned long ago, replaced by more modern networks. Networks that were now gone. Fried. Destroyed. This was all that was left. A relic. A last whisper. The screen blinked weakly, struggling to stabilize. Signal output limited. "Doesn't matter," she said, forcing a breath. "Just needs to reach someone." But who? Nearby systems were too far. Allies none close enough. The Empire had made sure of that. Her eyes drifted to a forgotten directory, an old contact list buried deep within the system. Most entries were outdated, dead ends. Except one. A name that didn't belong. No official record. No classification. Just a tag half corrupted. Human contact protocol. Lyra hesitated. She'd heard the rumors. Everyone had. Stories traded in low voices across distant stations about a species from beyond mapped space. Unpredictable, isolated, dangerous. Or protective, depending on who you asked. "No one else is coming," she whispered. Her finger hovered over the key. Then pressed. The signal burst outward, weak, fragmented, barely holding together as it pierced through the void. A desperate cry from a dying world. And then, nothing. No confirmation. No reply. Just silence again. Above Keller, the Imperial fleet began its descent. Dropships detached from their carriers, pouring into the atmosphere like falling stars. Thousands of them, maybe more. Panic spread through the cities. People ran. Families scattered. Sirens wailed endlessly, their sound blending into a single, overwhelming scream. Governor Relm remained at his post. "Ground forces won't hold," an officer said quietly. "I know. Evacuation." Relm stared at the burning sky. "There's nowhere to go." Then suddenly, a blip appeared on the long-range sensors. One of the officers frowned. "Sir, we're detecting an incoming vessel." Relm blinked. "From where?" "Unknown, it just appeared." Above them, in orbit, the Imperial flagship registered it too. "Commander," a technician said, confusion bleeding into his voice. "Single ship entering the system." The commander leaned forward, intrigued. "Only one?" "Yes, sir." A faint chuckle rippled across the bridge. The massive fleet loomed like a wall of death, and against it, a single, solitary ship drifted into view. Small, unremarkable, almost fragile. No visible weapons. No escort. Just a quiet presence in the void. The commander smirked, curious. "Orders, sir." He didn't hesitate. "Open a channel." On the view screen, a human face appeared. Calm, focused, unafraid. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the human broke the silence. "Imperial fleet," he said evenly. "You are trespassing. Withdraw immediately." The bridge erupted in laughter. The commander leaned back, amused. "And if we do?" The human's expression didn't change. "Then this ends badly for you." The laughter grew louder, mocking, dismissive. The commander waved a hand lazily. "Destroy it." Weapons locked. Energy built across dozens of warships, converging on the tiny vessel. A single pulse would erase it from existence. The order was given. Fire. And then, everything went dark. Not space. Not the stars. The fleet. Every system gone. Weapons offline. Shields collapsed. Engines dead. Silence fell over the bridge like a suffocating weight. What just happened?" someone whispered. The commander stared at his console, disbelief flooding his face. Across the entire fleet, chaos erupted. Ships drifted. Commands failed. Nothing responded. As if someone, had simply reached in and turned them off. The lone human ship remained. Unmoving. Untouched. Watching. The commander's voice was barely a whisper now. "It's just one ship." But for the first time in his long, victorious career, he didn't believe that mattered anymore. Because deep in his gut, he felt it. This wasn't an attack. This wasn't even a warning. This was a message. And somewhere far beyond the stars, something had just heard Keller's call. Something that was already on its way. The silence didn't feel like victory. It felt wrong. Across the Imperial fleet, thousands of crew members sat frozen at their stations, staring at lifeless interfaces that only moments ago had controlled the most powerful war machines in the galaxy. Now they were nothing more than drifting metal. "Status report," the commander snapped, his voice cutting through the suffocating stillness. "No response from primary systems. Backup grids are offline. Manual overrides aren't working, sir. It's like the ship doesn't recognize us anymore." The words overlapped, rising into panic. The commander clenched his jaw. This wasn't possible. Imperial systems were designed to withstand anything: EMP bursts, cyber attacks, even internal sabotage. This wasn't failure. This was control. Something had taken control. His eyes slowly lifted to the view screen. The human ship still floated there, small, quiet, almost insignificant against the backdrop of the paralyzed fleet. "Almost." "Open a channel," the commander ordered, his voice lower now. A flicker. The human appeared instantly, as if the connection had never been interrupted. He hadn't moved. He hadn't changed. But somehow, the entire situation felt different. "You were warned," the human said. No anger, no triumph. Just fact. The commander leaned forward. What did you do to my fleet? The human tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Stopped it. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need. A ripple of unease passed through the bridge crew. The commander forced himself to stay composed. You expect me to believe a single ship did this? A brief pause. Then the human replied, almost casually. No. The commander frowned. Then what? You're not fighting a ship, the human said. You're interacting with a system. The word hung in the air. System. Not weapon, not fleet. Something larger. Something integrated. The commander's throat tightened. Explain. But the human didn't. Instead, his gaze shifted, just slightly, past the camera as if listening to something beyond the room. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. You shouldn't escalate this. A flash of irritation broke through the commander's control. You think we haven't already? You haven't, the human said. Not yet. That calm certainty made something cold settle in the commander's chest. He turned sharply. Communications, send a priority signal to high command. A junior officer hesitated. Sir, if we classify this as an unknown threat. They'll send reinforcements, the commander finished. Exactly. The officer swallowed, and if this system reacts. The commander didn't look back. We are the Galactic Empire, he said firmly. We don't hesitate because of one ship. His hand tightened into a fist. Send it. The signal launched. Encoded, encrypted, urgent. It tore across the void faster than anything the colony had transmitted, carrying data, recordings, sensor logs. Proof. Proof that something had just crippled an Imperial fleet without firing a single visible shot. For a brief moment after the transmission completed, everything was still. The commander exhaled slowly. There, now we'll see how long your little trick lasts. On the screen, the human's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Not anger. Something worse. Regret. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. The commander's confidence wavered just slightly. Why? The human met his eyes. Because now they'll come faster. A murmur spread across the bridge. They, the commander pressed. Who exactly do you think you are? The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced away again, listening as if receiving information no one else could hear. When he looked back, there was something almost human in his expression now. Something that resembled pity. Not who, he corrected softly. A pause. Then, how many? Far beyond the edges of Imperial charts. Beyond trade lanes, beyond colonies, beyond even the rumors. The signal was received. Not by a single station. Not by a single fleet. But by something vast. A network. It didn't ring alarms. It didn't trigger panic. It simply acknowledged. Across the darkness, dormant structures came alive. Massive constructs hidden in asteroid fields, silent ships drifting between stars, deep space relays older than most civilizations. Lights flickered on. Engines began to hum. One by one. Then hundreds at a time. Then thousands. Coordinates aligned without command. Vectors calculated without discussion. No voices. No hesitation. Only movement. Back in the Keller system, the first signs appeared. Commander, a sensor officer whispered. The commander turned. What is it? The officer's hands trembled over the console. We're detecting hyperspace disturbances. From where? Everywhere. The word landed like a blow. On the main display, the black canvas of space began to ripple. Tiny distortions at first, barely noticeable. Then larger. Then violent. Like the fabric of reality itself was starting to tear open. The commander stepped closer, disbelief creeping into his voice. That's not possible. Nothing operates at that scale. The human ship didn't move. Didn't react. As if this was expected. As if this was already too late. Count them, the commander ordered, his voice tight. The sensor officer stared at the readings, eyes widening with every passing second. I call. What do you mean you can't? There are too many. The system can't track them all, it's exceeding capacity. A wave of unease swept through the bridge. Not confusion. Not chaos. Something deeper. Fear. The distortions grew, stretching across the system like cracks in glass. And from within those cracks, shapes began to form. Not one, not 10, not even hundreds. Something far worse. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper. What did we just call down on ourselves? On the view screen, the human finally spoke again. And this time, there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. You asked for reinforcements. A pause. Then quietly, so did we. And as the first massive silhouette began to emerge from the tearing void, the Empire realized something that had never crossed its mind before. They weren't the biggest force in the galaxy. Not even close, the first ship did arrive. It materialized. Space itself split open, not like a clean hyperspace exit, but like reality had been forced apart. A jagged tear stretched across the stars, glowing with unstable light, and from within it, something emerged. Slowly, deliberately, the silhouette alone was enough to silence the entire Imperial flagship. It dwarfed everything. Larger than a capital-class warship, larger than anything recorded in Imperial history. Its surface wasn't smooth or polished. It was layered, segmented, like overlapping plates of dark metal grown rather than built. Faint lines of light pulsed across its hull, not blinking like systems, but breathing. Scale increasing, a sensor officer whispered, voice shaking. It's still coming through. The commander didn't respond. He couldn't, because behind that first ship, more tiers opened. 1 became 10. 10 became dozens. Dozens became hundreds. The sky wasn't filling with ships. It was being replaced by them. Each rupture in space revealed another vessel, different shapes, different sizes, none following the rigid symmetry of the Empire. Some were long and blade-like, others wide and fortress-like. Some moved with smooth precision, others adjusted in subtle, almost organic motions. But all of them shared one thing. They didn't hesitate. They didn't scan. They didn't posture. They arrived like they already knew exactly where to be. Commander, the sensor officer said again, more urgently this time. The count is still climbing. Our systems can't process this many entries. Estimate, the commander demanded, though his voice had lost its edge. Thousands, the officer said. A beat. No more. The word echoed through the bridge like a sentence. On the lower decks, crew members abandoned protocol entirely. Some stood frozen. Others backed away from their stations as if distance could somehow protect them from what they were seeing. They're surrounding us. No, they're positioning. For what? No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. At the center of it all, the original human ship remained exactly where it had been. Unmoved. Unthreatened. No longer alone. The commander's gaze snapped back to the view screen. Open the channel again, now. It activated instantly. The same human appeared. Same calm posture. Same steady eyes. But now, behind him, faint reflections danced across his bridge. Lights from a fleet that had just rewritten the balance of power in seconds. You escalated, the human said quietly. The commander's composure cracked. What is this? What are these ships? The human considered him for a moment. Support, he answered. Support, the commander nearly shouted. This is an invasion force. No, the human replied. A slight pause. This is a response. The distinction hit harder than any weapon. The commander swallowed, forcing control back into his voice. That was your full fleet. Even as he asked it, part of him already knew the answer. But he needed to hear it. Needed to understand the scale of what he was facing. On the screen, the human blinked once. Then slowly, he shook his head. No. The single word landed like gravity itself had increased. A faint, almost apologetic expression crossed the human's face. That was just the one who was closest. Silence. Absolute. Crushing. Across the Imperial fleet, something shifted. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't strategic. It was emotional. For the first time in centuries of conquest, domination, and unquestioned superiority, the Empire felt small. The massive human vessels began to move. Not aggressively. Not yet. They spread out, forming a perimeter that stretched beyond sensor range, cutting off every possible escape vector with terrifying precision. Not a single gap. Not a single mistake. Every Imperial ship, once the hunter, was now trapped. Commander, a navigation officer, whispered, "We're boxed in completely." The commander stared at the display, at the countless human ships, at the impossible scale of it all. This isn't a fleet," he said slowly. "No, sir," another officer replied, voice hollow. "It's a wall." On the surface of Keller, people emerged cautiously from shelters, eyes lifting toward the sky. What they saw didn't make sense. The Empire's ships still silent, powerless. And beyond them, an ocean of unfamiliar vessels, stretching so far that they blocked out entire sections of the stars. Lyra Venn stood outside the comms station, breath caught in her throat. "They came," she whispered. "Not just one. Not just help. Something far greater. Something that had been waiting." Back on the flagship, the commander's hands trembled slightly, something no one on the bridge had ever seen before. He turned back to the screen. "What do you want?" he asked, the question no longer carrying authority but uncertainty. The human's answer came without hesitation. "Leave. That's it. That's it." A pause. Then more quietly, "Or we make sure you never threaten another world again." The commander closed his eyes for a brief moment. In that instant, decades of victories meant nothing. All the Empire's power, all its dominance, had just been eclipsed. Not by a war, not by a battle, but by a response. Far away, deep within the Empire's core systems, High Command received the full transmission. They watched the footage, analyzed the data, replayed the moment the first ship appeared. Then the second. Then all the rest. The room fell silent. No arguments. No strategies. Just disbelief. Until finally, one of the senior officials spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You mean?" He hesitated, as if saying it out loud would make it worse. "That wasn't their full army. And no one in the room had an answer." The silence stretched too long. Not the silence of peace. The silence of something deciding. On the Imperial flagship, no one moved. Thousands of officers, trained, conditioned, engineered for dominance, stood frozen in place, waiting for an order that refused to come. The commander stared at the screen, at the human who had just offered him a choice so simple it felt like a trap. Leave or disappear. There was no negotiation, no terms, no diplomacy. Just a line. And the Empire didn't do lines. "Commander," a senior officer said carefully, "High Command is requesting a full status update." The words sounded normal. Routine. But nothing about this moment was. The commander didn't turn. "Transmit everything," he said quietly. "Live feed." A pause. "Everything, sir." He exhaled slowly. "Everything." Across the galaxy, deep within the Empire's core, the High Command chamber came alive. Massive hollow displays ignited, projecting the Keller system in full scale. The trapped fleet, the encircling human armada, the lone ship at the center of it all. At first, no one spoke. They simply watched, analyzed, measured. Then the questions began. Confirm scale. Unknown exceeds sensor limits. Technology classification. Non-comparable. Threat level. A long pause. Total. The word echoed across the chamber like a verdict. Back in orbit, the commander finally spoke again. "You're asking the Galactic Empire to retreat," he said, his voice steadier now, but thinner than before. "I'm telling you to," the human replied. "You understand what that means?" "I do." The commander's eyes narrowed. "If we withdraw, this system is no longer isolated, it becomes protected." Another pause. "Correct. By you." "Yes." The commander let out a slow breath, something heavy settling in his chest. "Do you realize what that implies for the rest of the galaxy?" The human didn't hesitate. "Yes." No arrogance. No threat. Just certainty. On the surface of Keller, the chaos had stopped, but the fear hadn't. People stood in the streets, staring upward at a sky that no longer made sense. The Empire motionless. The unknown fleet watching. Children clung to their parents. Soldiers held their weapons but didn't raise them. Because what would be the point? Lyra Venn stood beside the comm station, her eyes locked on the heavens. "What are you?" she whispered under her breath. Not in fear. In awe. Back in the high command chamber, the debate had already begun. "We cannot retreat," one official snapped. "It will shatter Imperial authority across every sector." "And what do you propose?" another countered. "We attack with what? Our fleet is still intact." "No," a third voice cut in sharply. "It's not, it's being allowed to exist." That shut the room up. For a moment. "Run projections," the high strategist ordered. "Already done," an analyst replied, pale. "All scenarios result in total fleet loss within minutes." "Minutes," someone repeated. "That's optimistic." A heavy silence followed. Back on the flagship, the commander's console flickered weakly. Still no control. Still no weapons. Still nothing. He looked up at the human again. "If we leave," he said slowly, "you let us go." "Yes." "No pursuit. No pursuit. No retaliation." The human held his gaze. "No retaliation unless you return." The meaning was clear. This was not a negotiation. It was a boundary. The commander closed his eyes briefly. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Empire didn't retreat. It advanced. It conquered. It erased. That was the order of things. But right now, the order had changed. "Commander," the comms officer said softly, "High Command is issuing a directive." The room stilled. Every eye turned. "Transmit," the commander said. The message came through in a cold, official tone. "All Imperial forces are to disengage immediately. Withdraw from Keller system. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Repeat, withdraw." For a moment, no one reacted. Because no one had ever heard those words before. Not like this. Not against a single system. The commander's jaw tightened. There it was. The unthinkable. The Empire was blinking first. He opened his eyes and looked at the human. "We're leaving," he said. The human gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good." No celebration. No victory. Just acknowledgement. Then slowly, the impossible happened. Across the Imperial fleet, systems flickered back to life. One by one, engines restarted. Navigation returned. Weapons remained offline. A message. Not a gift. "Sir," a technician whispered, "they're restoring our control." The commander nodded once. "Helm," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "prepare for withdrawal." Massive Imperial ships began to turn. Slowly, carefully, like predators backing away from something they couldn't understand. And the human fleet didn't move to stop them, didn't advance, didn't threaten. They simply watched. As the first Imperial vessel entered hyperspace, A strange realization settled over everyone watching. This wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a war. It was a warning. On Keller's surface, a wave of disbelief spread as the Empire's ships began to vanish. They're leaving. They're actually leaving. No one cheered. Not yet, because something even more unsettling remained. The sky was still full. Back on the flagship, just before jumping to hyperspace, the commander looked back one last time. At the endless human armada. At the single ship that had started it all. And at the truth he couldn't ignore anymore. "We didn't lose," he murmured. A junior officer glanced at him, confused. "Sir?" The commander's eyes hardened. "No," he corrected quietly. "We were spared." The fleet vanished into hyperspace. Gone. Defeated without a single shot. But far away in the Empire's core. No one felt relief. Because now they understood something far worse than defeat. There was a force in the galaxy that didn't conquer, didn't expand, didn't threaten. It simply responded. And the next time, they might not be given a choice. The Empire didn't celebrate its return. There were no victory signals, no triumphant broadcasts, no declarations of strategic repositioning. Only silence. Across the core worlds, the Imperial fleet's reappearance should have been routine. Instead, it triggered something unprecedented. Fear. Massive warships, once symbols of unstoppable power, emerged from hyperspace without formation, without ceremony. Some bore scorch marks not from battle, but from system overload. Others drifted slightly before stabilizing, as if their crews were still adjusting to having control again. They looked shaken, and that alone was enough to spread whispers. What happened out there? Why did they retreat? Who forced them? No official answer came, because no official answer could explain it. Inside High Command, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Gone was the certainty. Gone was the arrogance. In its place, calculation. Cold, careful, uncertain calculation. "They didn't pursue us," one strategist said, packing slowly. "They allowed the withdrawal." "Allowed," another repeated, distaste in his voice. "That implies control," a third added. "It confirms it," the high strategist corrected. He stood at the center of the chamber, staring at the frozen hologram of Keller, the moment before the fleet withdrew. The human armada filled the projection, stretching beyond its limits. "We weren't outmatched," he said quietly. A pause. "We were contained." A junior analyst hesitated before speaking. "Sir, we've finished compiling the data from the encounter." "Report." Energy readings suggest their system override wasn't localized. It spread through our entire fleet simultaneously. "How?" "We don't know." "Estimate." The analyst swallowed. "It didn't spread from their ship." The room stilled. "What are you saying?" someone asked. The analyst zoomed the hologram out, farther than before, beyond the visible fleet. Based on the data, the disruption originated from multiple points, not just one. A slow, uncomfortable realization crept into the room. "Multiple ships?" a strategist asked. The analyst shook his head. "No." A pause. "Something bigger." Meanwhile, on Keller, the people hadn't moved on. They couldn't. The Empire was gone, but the sky was still filled with something far more incomprehensible. The human fleet hadn't left. It had repositioned. Ships now hovered at precise distances across orbit, forming a silent, invisible shield around the system. Some were close enough to be seen clearly, their immense hulls casting faint shadows over the planet's surface. Others were distant, barely visible, but always there. Watching. Waiting. Governor Reln stood once again in the command tower, but this time, he wasn't alone. The same human from the lone ship now stood across from him. In person. Not armored. Not guarded. Just present. "You could have destroyed them," Reln said quietly. The human nodded, yes. Why didn't you? A brief pause. Because that's not the point. Relm frowned, then what is? The human stepped closer to the window, looking out at the sky. At some point, he said, someone has to decide where the line is. Relm followed his gaze. The line? The human nodded. And once it's drawn, it has to be enforced. Relm's voice lowered, and Keller is that line. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as one of the distant ships shifted position, smooth, precise, almost effortless. Then he said, Keller is the message. The words settled heavily in the room. Far away in the Empire's core, that message was already spreading. Not through official channels, through rumor, through fear, through fragmented recordings leaked across hidden networks. Footage of the fleet being disabled, of the impossible armada arriving, of the Empire retreating. Entire systems began to whisper about a new force, a silent power that didn't conquer worlds, but defended them. What do they want? One official demanded during a closed briefing. No expansion, no demands, no territorial claims, an analyst replied. Then why intervene at all? The room fell quiet, because the answer didn't fit imperial logic. They respond to threats, the high strategist said slowly. A few heads turned. They don't initiate conflict, he continued. They don't seek dominance. Then what are they? Someone asked. The strategist's eyes hardened. They're a deterrent. The word carried weight. More than fleets. More than weapons. Because a deterrent didn't need to win wars. It just needed to make them impossible. Back on Keller, Lyra Venn stood near the outskirts of the colony, staring up at one of the closer human ships. It was massive, far larger than she had imagined. And yet, it wasn't threatening, not like the Empire's ships had been. It just existed. Steady, silent, present. Hard to believe, isn't it? She turned. The human stood a few steps away, hands behind his back. You heard the signal, she said. He nodded once. You answered. We always do. Lyra studied him carefully. Why? The human met her gaze. Because someone has to. A distant rumble echoed across the sky, not from engines, but from synchronized movement. Dozens of ships adjusted position at once, tightening the formation around the system. Lyra's breath caught slightly. They're not leaving, are they? The human shook his head. No. For how long? He looked back up at the fleet. Then quietly, as long as it takes, and far beyond Keller, deep in the darkness where no Imperial sensor had ever reached. More lights flickered on, more ships aligned, more systems awakened, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. What had arrived at Keller wasn't a fleet, it was only a fraction, and something much larger had just begun to move. The Empire did not strike back. That alone changed everything. Across the galaxy, systems that had lived under the Empire's shadow for generations began to notice the shift. Patrol routes became less frequent. Occupation fleets pulled back, subtly at first, then noticeably. Blockades loosened. Inspections slowed. It wasn't a retreat. Not officially, but it felt like one. In the Imperial core, the High Command Chamber had transformed into something colder. Not weaker, more careful. A massive projection dominated the center, far larger than before. It no longer showed just Keller. Now it mapped something far more unsettling. Expanding points of human presence. They've established observation zones, an analyst reported, highlighting several outer systems. Not colonies, not bases, just presence. Define presence, a senior official demanded. The analyst hesitated. Ships, sometimes one, sometimes dozens. They appear after distress signals or shortly before Imperial intervention. A quiet ripple moved through the room. They're predicting us, someone said. No, the high strategist corrected, eyes fixed on the display. They're watching us. He stepped forward, zooming the projection outward. More points appeared. Then more. Not concentrated. Not centralized. Spread. Wide. Like a net cast across the galaxy. They're not reacting randomly, he continued. There's a pattern. What kind of pattern? The strategist's jaw tightened. A boundary. The word landed heavy. Back on Keller, life had resumed, but not as it was before. The colony rebuilt quickly, faster than expected. Not because of resources. Because of certainty. The sky was no longer empty. And that changed how people lived. Children played outside again. Markets reopened. Ships came and went, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. No Imperial patrols stopped them. No warships loomed overhead. Only the silent, distant presence of something else. Lyra Venn stood on a ridge overlooking the colony, watching a transport ship lift off into orbit. It passed close to one of the human vessels, close enough that its shadow briefly swallowed the smaller craft hole. Yet nothing happened. No warnings. No interference. Just coexistence. You're getting used to it. The voice came from behind her. She didn't turn. Not used to it, she said, just less afraid of it. The human stepped beside her, following her gaze. That's the idea. Lyra crossed her arms. The Empire isn't coming back, is it? A pause. They might, the human said honestly. She glanced at him. That doesn't sound reassuring. It's not supposed to be. Far away, in a classified sector deep within Imperial territory. Something moved. Not publicly. Not officially. But deliberately. A fleet. Smaller than the one sent to Keller, but far more specialized. Experimental ships. Blacker than standard hulls. Sharper, built with technologies never deployed in open war. And at their center, a flagship unlike any other. They've drawn a line, the high strategist said, addressing a select group of commanders. Now we test it. One of them frowned. With respect, we already did. No, the strategist replied coldly. We tested their response to force. He stepped closer to the projection. This time we test their limits. Back in the Keller system, the human fleet remained still. But not idle. Inside one of the larger vessels, a vast chamber hummed with quiet energy. Displays stretched across curved walls, tracking movements not just in the system, but far beyond it. Patterns, signals, vectors, all constantly shifting. The human officer from the first ship stood at the center, watching. Another figure approached. They're moving, the newcomer said. I know. Not toward Keller. I know. A pause. They're choosing a different target. The officer's expression didn't change. Which one? The answer came with a flicker of data across the display. A distant system. Unremarkable. Unprotected. Do we intervene? The second figure asked. Silence. Then, not yet. Back in Imperial space, the experimental fleet surged forward. Fast. Precise. No hesitation. They'll respond, one of the commanders said confidently. They have to. The high strategist watched in silence. Maybe, he said. A pause. Or maybe they won't. Because this wasn't just about power anymore. It was about understanding. Limits. Boundaries. Rules. And for the first time since Keller, the Empire was about to test something far more dangerous than a fleet. It was about to test intent. Back on Keller, Lyra suddenly felt it. A shift. Subtle, but real. The ships above moved. Not much. Just enough. She looked up, heart tightening. They're doing something. Beside her, the human was already watching the sky. Yes. What is it? A long pause followed. Then he answered quietly, "They're deciding." Far across the stars, in a system no one was watching, the Imperial fleet arrived. Weapons armed, targets locked, and for the first time since Keller, there was no human ship waiting for them. The commander of the strike fleet smiled faintly. "See," he said, "they can't be everywhere." But light years away, deep in the darkness, something shifted. And this time, it didn't wait to be called. The system was quiet. That was why the Empire chose it. No strategic value, no major population centers, no known defenses, just a scattering of mining platforms orbiting a dim, aging star, barely worth cataloging. "Perfect. Confirm no external signals," the Imperial Strike Commander ordered. "Confirmed," an officer replied. "No distress calls, no long-range transmissions. They didn't even see us coming." A thin smile crossed the commander's face. "Good." He turned to the main display. The fleet hung in perfect formation, sleek black experimental vessels designed for one purpose: to operate unseen. "To all ships," he said, his voice steady and controlled, "prepare for synchronized strike. No survivors, no witnesses." The officers around him didn't hesitate. This was what the Empire did best. Clean, efficient, final, weapons charged, targeting arrays locked onto the scattered installations below. A moment passed. Then, fire, energy lanced downward. Brilliant beams cut through the void, tearing into metal and stone. Mining platforms exploded in bursts of fire and debris, their fragile structures unable to withstand even a fraction of the Empire's power. No resistance. No warning. Just destruction. Minimal energy expenditure, a technician reported. Targets neutralized. The commander exhaled slowly. "Good, begin phase 2. "Sir." "Broadcast the aftermath," he said coldly. "Let the outer system see what happens when we choose not to be watched." But before the transmission could begin, something changed. At first it was subtle. A flicker across the sensors. A distortion, small, almost ignorable. Then another. "Commander," a sensor officer said, uncertain. "What is it?" "I'm picking up fluctuations." "In hyperspace?" "No, sir." A pause. "In real space?" The commander frowned. "Clarify." The officer's hands moved rapidly across the console. "It's not a jump signature. It's like the space around us is shifting." Across the fleet, the stars themselves seemed to waver. Not vanish. Not distort like hyperspace. Just move. Slightly. Wrongly. "Stabilize sensors," the commander snapped. "They are stable, sir," the officer shot back, panic creeping into his voice. "This isn't an error." Then the lights dimmed. Not fully. Just enough to be noticed. A low hum filled the flagship. Deep. Resonant. Not from the engines. Not from any system they controlled. "Power fluctuation," the commander demanded. "No, sir, all systems are." The officer stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened. "No." "What?" "They're not." Across the fleet, systems began to shut down. Not violently, not suddenly, but inevitably, like something was pressing down on them. Weapons powered off. Engines slowed. Communications flickered. The commander stood slowly. "No," he whispered. On the main display, something appeared. Not a fleet. Not a formation. A presence. At first, it looked like nothing. Just a darker patch of space, subtle, almost invisible against the backdrop of stars. But then, it moved. The darkness shifted, unfolding like something waking from sleep. Lines of faint light traced across its surface, outlining a structure so vast it defied comprehension. It didn't arrive. It had already been there. "Scale," the sensor officer choked. I can't, there's no reference, it's..." Say it, the commander demanded. The officer's voice broke. It's bigger than the fleet. Not just bigger, massively bigger. The experimental ships, designed to operate beyond detection, beyond engagement, now looked like debris drifting in the shadow of something incomprehensibly large. A signal cut through the failing comms. Clear, direct, unavoidable. The same human voice. You chose a system without witnesses, he said quietly. The commander's breath hitched. That's not possible, he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. You thought we needed to be called. A pause. The hum deepened. You were wronged. The commander's hands tightened into fists. What are you? For the first time, the human didn't answer immediately. Instead, the darkness moved again, and the fleet felt it. Not as force, not as impact, but as pressure, like the weight of an entire ocean pressing down from all sides. Then the answer came. Not loud, not threatening, just certain. We're the ones who make sure the line holds. The commander's vision blurred slightly as more systems failed. Fire everything, he ordered, desperation breaking through. All ships full barrage. But nothing happened. Not a single weapon responded. The human voice returned. You already crossed it. And then, the darkness shifted once more. Not toward them. Through them. Ships vanished. Not destroyed. Not exploded. Just gone. Like they had never been there. One by one. The commander staggered, gripping the console as his world collapsed around him. This isn't war. No, it was. Because war implied resistance. This was something else. Something final. Far away, in the safety of Keller's orbit, the human officer watched the data stream in. Silent. Unmoving. They acted, the second figure said quietly. Yes. Too late to stop it. A pause. Not too late to answer. On the display, the last Imperial ship disappeared. No debris. No trace. Nothing. Back on Keller, Lyra felt the shift again. Stronger this time. Final. She looked up at the sky. The fleet above hadn't moved. But somehow, everything felt different. Beside her, the human spoke softly. They won't try that again. Lyra swallowed. How can you be sure? The human's eyes remained fixed on the stars. Because now they understand. A pause. We don't always wait. Empire didn't announce the loss. It erased it. No records of the strike fleet. No mission logs. No deployment orders. Entire command chains quietly removed from official systems, as if they had never existed at all. Ships didn't return. Crews didn't report. And yet, everyone noticed. Because fleets didn't just vanish. Not Imperial ones. Not like that. Whispers spread faster than any official transmission. Through smugglers. Through traitors. Through half-corrupted sensor logs and fragments of intercepted data. Stories of a fleet that entered a quiet system and never came out. They were testing them. That's what I heard. And, a pause, they failed. But the truth was worse than failure. Inside High Command, the silence had deepened into something suffocating. No arguments now. No arrogance. Only realization. They didn't respond to a call, the high strategist said quietly, standing before the central projection. They acted independently. A senior official frowned. You're certain? Yes. The strategist zoomed in on the recorded data, the faint distortions, the impossible readings, the moment the fleet simply ceased to exist. There was no signal strong enough to reach them in time, no delay that fits response patterns. He turned slowly. They were already watching. The room went cold. Another official spoke, his voice tighter than before. So what are we dealing with? A patrol network, autonomous defenses. The strategist shook his head. No. He let the word hang. Something worse. He expanded the projection again. Not just Keller. Not just the lost system. Now it showed dozens of points. Confirmed sightings, rumored encounters, unexplained disappearances. Each one subtle. Each one precise. Each one connected. They don't occupy territory, he said. They don't expand. They don't conquer. A pause. They define limits. The meaning settled heavily over the chamber. Because limits were something the Empire had never acknowledged before. What happens if we cross those limits again? Someone asked. No one answered immediately. Because now, they already knew. Back on Keller, the sky had become something else entirely. Not a battlefield. Not a threat. A constant. The human fleet remained, but it had changed. Not in structure. In feeling. Where there had once been tension, there was now stability. Ships moved occasionally, adjusting positions, maintaining their silent formation, but there was no sense of imminent violence. Only presence. Only watchfulness. Lyra Venn stood once more at the ridge, the wind brushing softly against her face as she looked up. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked. The human stood beside her again, as he always seemed to when the questions mattered. "No," he said. "Ever." A faint pause. "Not completely." She frowned slightly. That doesn't sound like a normal answer. It's not a normal situation. Lyra crossed her arms, still staring at the massive ships above. "So what is this then?" she asked. "A protection zone, a border." The human was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's a promise." She turned to him, "A promise." He nodded. That if something like the Empire shows up again. A distant shift rippled through the fleet, subtle, synchronized, almost like a heartbeat. "We'll already be here." Lyra let that settle. And for the first time since the invasion, she felt something stronger than relief. She felt safe. Far across the galaxy, that feeling began to spread. Not everywhere. Not instantly. But slowly. Outer systems that had lived in fear of imperial expansion started to change. Trade routes reopened. Hidden colonies revealed themselves. Signals once suppressed or never sent began reaching out into the void. And sometimes, they were answered. Not always with fleets. Not always with ships. Sometimes just with presence. A single vessel appearing in orbit. Silent. Unmoving. Enough. The message became clear. Not spoken. Not declared. Understood. Meanwhile, within the Empire, something far more dangerous than fear took root. Hesitation. Fleets paused before entering new systems. Commanders questioned orders. Strategists recalculated scenarios that had once been simple. Because now, there was always a question. What if they're watching? And that question changed everything. Back on Keller, the human officer received a transmission. Short, encrypted, from far beyond the system. He read it once, then again. "They're adapting," the second figure said, stepping beside him. "Yes. Will it be enough?" The officer looked out at the stars. At the vast, silent network stretching far beyond what anyone could see. "No," he said quietly. A pause. "But it's a start." He turned away from the display. "Maintain position," he ordered. And above Keller the fleet held. Not as conquerors. Not as rulers. But as something the galaxy had never truly known before. Guardians. And in the quiet between stars, where no empire had ever looked closely enough. More ships waited. More systems watched. And more lines were already drawn.